Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Dance to the Music. For the viewers on YouTube and Spotify, as you can see, this is a whole new setup or quite different setup, so I'm trying to get used to it. They stole my tables. But nonetheless, I have a very special guest today, which is none other than the legendary Merlin Bobb. Thank you for making the trip here to Queens, and thank you for being here.
My pleasure. It's not far from Midtown, so it wasn't a big hike.
Okay, great. You mentioned in one of the messages, it's like, oh, it's okay, Long Island City. I know the city in and out. You grew up in Brooklyn and in Manhattan, if I'm informed correctly. So
Yes.
a quintessential New Yorker, so to speak. If we put music and music industry aside, how do you feel nowadays about the city in general and its changes?
Uh, if you have children in the city, and then it's a good thing because it's Disneyland in New York right now compared to the 70s and 80s when I grew up in Manhattan, when it was broke and the city was running rampant with everything you could possibly think of negatively. But it was a time when creative inspiration was instilled in all of us because we had really nothing else to do but try to make music, and music was a good thing and it kept us out of trouble. So growing up in the city and in Brooklyn, Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn to Midtown, Manhattan, that move in itself changed my life, just moving from Bed-Stuy in the late 70s to
Where
Midtown Manhattan.
Midtown Manhattan.
To
Tell me about that. I don't think it was a culture shock, but like that change at whatever age that happened
Well,
for you.
you know, honestly, my mother felt it was necessary, of course, to get us from Bed-Stuy during that time because it was just pretty. It was do or die Bed-Stuy back then. It's not Bedford Heights, whatever they call it now.
Yeah.
But anyway, she was an amazing, and is, I say, amazing woman, and got us into the city, which changed both of our lives. Mine especially, because from a young age, of 10 maybe, I really knew I wanted to do music. But all we had in our neighborhood was a bodega in one corner and a liquor store in the other, and that was it, nothing else. So when we got to the city, it opened up, you know, a whole nother world for me and exploration of music, because during that time it was just such a creative city. Everyone was here in New York during the late 70s and early 80s that were looking to start a creative career. So you had artists, you had fashion people, you had music people. It was really very inspiring time, especially us being teenagers running the city. And of course, back then there was no cell phones, so when you went out, you know, you had to come home. Your mother wasn't calling you, your parents. You know, it was like when you went out, you were out, and we had adventures throughout the city. But I'm glad it's the way it is now because it really was a tough time. But for young teenagers, inspiring to do music, we had a variation of clubs we went to. We didn't just go to there was no house back then, but we didn't go to just underground clubs. We went to punk rock clubs, and we went to CBGBs, and we went to Mars, and we went to, of course, the Garage and the Loft and all these places, and Roxy, and you know, everyone. It was a melting pot, not just of people, but of music and the genres. Because if you know, during that time, salsa came from New York at that time, and hip hop came from New York at that time. Punk rock was elevated in New York at that time, and house music was created during that time, towards the late 70s and early 80s. So all that came from a city that was broke and garbage piled up on the streets and no police anywhere. And us as teenagers, thank goodness we had the music to keep us together and to keep us out of trouble during that time. So it was a very exciting time, a very creative time in New York, and I wouldn't change it for anything. Grew up in the city during that time.
Amazing. You still live in New York City to this day, so I think
Yeah,
that's
New York and New Jersey both. Yeah.
okay. So there is such a tremendous history that you have in the story. I'm gonna go through a little, not necessarily a chronological timeline. I'm just gonna go back and forth because I would like to talk to you about dance floor experience as part, like DJing part of it, since this podcast is called Dance to the Music. But
Sure.
I will touch on very important things that you have done in your career. So number one, I do need to mention that Tony Humphries is your cousin, to my knowledge. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes. And eventually you moved in, I did my little research, moved into a building where Timmy Regisford was your neighbor, or ended up being your neighbor.
Yes.
Some in that story. So to anybody listening, I feel like that's like is it trifecta? That term of like, it was meant to happen, what you guys created. Now, if I skip all these years and go to the early 2020s, where we are now, you came back to DJing recently in the last couple of years. How did it feel?
After 20 some plus years of not playing.
Wow. How did it feel when you first started playing again? And then what were some of the main differences that you noticed, positive and negative? Just maybe some really smaller details, or something that is really like compared to you playing back then?
Well, I think one of the first things that was totally different than playing 20 years ago was 20 years ago you played 10 hours sets, where now you just play a 2, maybe 3 hour set, sometimes an hour and a half, which I actually don't mind that much these days, because those 10 hours to 12 hours we used to play before was great because you could play a full repertoire, which I like to do. So I had to get used to just playing 2 hours compared to playing for 10 or 12. So that was a big change. Obviously, the technology, when I started playing back again, I was using CDs, believe it or not, last year. It's only been a year. And I quickly turned over, but I just had to feel comfortable where I left off. And where I left off was everyone's playing CDs through their CDJs. And so that is a nice change. But I play at Dante's in Miami pretty often. I get to play vinyl. Like I haven't done that. That was the first time I played vinyl in like 30 years when I played at Dante a few times this year and last year. But yeah, that's pretty much the biggest change. Obviously, the crowds have changed. The music genre has many, many more subgenres to it now than it had before. Because and I say this because this is what I'm told from everyone, but we are the pioneers of house
definitely.
music. So I was playing whatever back then. I got from Boy Jarvis and Timmy in the room right next to mine, because me and Tony lived in the apartment with my mother, and Timmy was right next door with his mom and his brother and sister. Since we were 10, we were running around together.
That is crazy.
And Tony's 4 years older than both of us, and Timmy's younger than me. So he taught us when we were like, I don't know, 11, 12, how to play. And from that moment on, we said, okay, our dream was to be on the radio and to play in clubs, because we would listen every night to, at that time, I think Larry Levan and T. Scott were on BLS for a little bit, just playing, they would record mixes and then send it in. And we were like, oh my goodness, one day if we could do that. Not thinking that we ever could or would, because that's just like, these teen kids thinking they're going to do that. But, it just goes to show you, with opportunities and a lot of freaking hard work and having a unit and sticking together, we did it, because I spent a decade or more on BLS doing the mix show, and Timmy spent 12 years, and Tony was there probably 15 years, and the two #1 stations in the country, not necessarily in New York, in the country during that time. So it was a lifelong dream that came true for all three of us, and we're all still grateful to this day, obviously, because that's what spearheaded our careers in the industry.
Do you get enough chances to sit down with each other and like really take it in and you know, be like, wow, we said what we did, or
we haven't stopped moving yet. We'll say that from when we were like 70 or 80, I guess. You know, so we got time to just chill and go over it. But yeah, I played with Tony for the first time in probably 30 years since we were, you know, very young, much younger. 2 months ago, we played together for the first time, and we played. He has a residency at LeBain, and he let me come on once in a while and play with him. But and Timmy, of course, we have the Shelter, so we've been playing together on our Shelter parties and our reunion parties.
As far as like you spoke on the differences that you've encountered as a DJ and actively playing. What would you say is, if there is a difference, are the differences when it comes to the clubbing experience as a whole, like the lighting, maybe the sound in itself, the venues? Well, just, you said the crowd changed earlier.
The differences between playing now, 24, 23, coming back, and 20 years ago, is definitely there aren't as many actual clubs, because back then there were actual clubs you went to and played, and there's primarily just one DJ who played there every weekend, who was a resident, whereas now it's more events that you're playing for than actual clubs, because there's not as many clubs in New York and in all the major cities, and even internationally as there once was, and especially after the pandemic, there's even less. So it's primarily just spaces that are, you know, have great parties now. And yes, there's parts of Brooklyn and not Bed-Stuy, but the Bushwick, et cetera, that has great clubs. But that at one time, they used to be all over the city. Now it's just one primarily destination, you know, that has actual clubs. But that's the one thing that really has changed. And, you know, the crowds have changed, and how they experience music, and experience the atmosphere, because they're coming today, whereas I hear a lot of DJs say they'd rather see them just dancing rather than standing there and dancing in front of them. But I understand that, being from the music side, the music business. I've been a music executive for 35 years, so I understand when an artist comes to see when a fan comes to see an artist perform, any artist perform, you're going to stand in front of them, or you're going to sit in front of them and watch them perform. And that's what DJs have become. Primarily, they become artists. And you're coming to there to see an artist that you're not going to see every weekend like you would do in a club 20 years ago. You wouldn't have to do that. You just, you know, now you're coming to see someone you see once a year, maybe twice a year. So you're going to stand there and experience it like it's a show. So it doesn't bother me as long as they're moving and as long as you feel energy, because to me, I still feel a certain amount of energy from a crowd, even if they're standing in front of you with their phones up. It's just, you know, every generation experiences things differently, and I can't come back and say, oh, how come you guys are not doing it like when I left off? No, that's 20 years ago. You know, let them experience it the way they feel comfortable, and I'm sure it'll evolve into something else in the next few years. You know?
Yeah, that was actually one of my questions, that I guess performance part of being a DJ, rather than it used to be that the DJ was not the primarily focus, or sometimes it was even hidden. So yeah. Another thing that and
just to say to that, the DJ, it wasn't until underground dance clubs and the experience that we got from some amazing music men and women during that time, and you know, I'm speaking of Larry Levan and David Pianacuso, and like I said before, T. Scott and Larry Patterson, and they just they were like maestros, as we call them, you know. So it wasn't just the DJ, which was early on in the club days, which were more commercial clubs like Studio 54 and so on. Nobody really paid attention to the DJ at all. They just came there for the experience. We're in underground dance clubs, which were predominantly gay clubs, black and Latino gay clubs. You got an experience of like going to an orchestral, performance, because you'd hear nothing but the most incredible R&B and disco put together in different ways as you've never heard it before. So it was a totally different experience for us, and I'm sure you have questions about this, but that experience of us as young teens, both in New York, New Jersey, Chicago, Detroit, because that's where predominantly a lot of the underground dance clubs were, gay dance clubs that we went to as kids, because those DJs were our heroes,
Right.
And so we wanted to be there, even though we were straight young kids. And that didn't matter, because once they found out we were straight, they would just, okay, you're young black kids or Latino kids that have talent, we're gonna pull you up. It was never any nonsense, never any like, you gotta do this, do that. No, it was truly support to see us win, because it was just like anything else in the music industry. You have a circle of people that good people and creative and intelligent people that you work with that do good business, that know bringing up younger can only help them and vice versa. But they're
Right.
giving us the opportunity, and that's what happened with us. We all, have to be so grateful for those that came before us, because they pulled us up.
One thing I wanted to talk to you about is the importance. Well, for me, it's important. I don't know how you feel about it, but as I would call it, I guess the ecosystem of nightlife or a party. To my knowledge, you worked at Zanzibar in I guess Kochek is what you would call it, when you were still a teenager, or maybe even too young to actually be in the club. And then eventually there's a picture floating around on the internet. You worked at the door as well. Mm-hmm. So what would you say, is it important or is it not to actually understand the whole picture, or the whole, maybe not the economics of nightlife, but just the different elements that it takes to actually make it a good thing, or
Right.
make it a good environment where we all can come together, or used to come together?
Well, I'll just say I started at age of 10 when Tony asked me to come. This is when I was much younger, and he was living in Brooklyn in East New York on Miller Avenue. And he told me to come over. He wanted to show me something. He got a new album. So I got on the train at like 11 years old, got on the train, went to Brooklyn from Bed-Stuy, and he showed me the new Jackson 5 album. And when I saw that, we sat there and just looked at it for like hours, just in awe of like how these little black kids can do this, like I can do this, like that was it. Like after that, I was hooked, and I knew music was my calling, but I didn't want to be an artist. I knew I wanted to do more or something else other than be an artist or produce, or even, but DJing was my, my craft. I loved it. Mm-hmm. And I knew that could be a stepping stone to be in the business, even though I didn't know what I wanted to do in the business. So it wasn't until we were 16, and I'll get to the Zanzibar and all that. When I was 16, we went to pick up some Prelude records, and we went to pick up some vinyl. And Larry Patterson was there, who was the head of A&R for Prelude at the time. And he was a brother, and I never saw a brother in any of the record labels when we went before that was actually behind a desk,
Mm-hmm.
So when we left, I asked Tony what he does, and he said, he does A&R. He's the person who signs the artist, finds the talent. I was like, all those hit records we hear on Prelude, he finds them? It's like, yep. And puts them together and discovers. And he's like, and I said to him, that light bulb moment I had, like it went off in my head. I never heard of this before, but the light bulb went off. And I told him right there, I was like, that's what I'm going to do. That's what I'm going to do. And he said to me, yeah, right, that shit is never going to happen. You crazy? He said, there's no black people that are major executives in this business, and it's so tough, and, you know, a lot of other reasons why and it's a big running joke with us now, because now, you know, over the years, he's like, yeah, I was wrong. I was wrong. But we laugh about it. But, you know, that was the first time. And it wasn't him discouraging me at all. It was him giving me just the lay of the land the way it was at that time. It wasn't like that at the time. And you know, let alone we weren't in the infrastructure of corporate America. We definitely weren't even in the infrastructure of the music industry.
Right.
But anyway, we, at that age, at 16, like maybe a few months later, we were asked to come to New Jersey by Larry Patterson, the same person that worked at Prelude, to come to this club called Zanzibar, because Larry Levan was going to play there on a Wednesday night. So, of course, wherever Larry went, we were going to go.
On a school night?
Yes, on a school night. Didn't, you know, it didn't matter. So we went. We never been to New Jersey before. We didn't, you know, and we're native New Yorkers, so you know how that is. You know, I don't even want to get into that, but that was back then. And so we went, and we were just blown away by the sound system, the club. We were like, we couldn't believe this was in Newark, New Jersey, and everybody we knew from New York was there, and all the people from New Jersey. We were like, how did they know this music? Like, they were really into it. But primarily, that's how I got there. And I said to myself, the wheels started turning. It's like, wow. And, you know, it was the only club that was run, that we knew of, that was run by all black staff. There was no other clubs run by all black staff.
I don't know any club today that is.
Yeah, that's a whole nother thing I'm not too happy about. But yeah, and immediately, you know, we wanted to work there. And Tony wanted to DJ there, play there. And I was too young to start. I wasn't DJing like that. I was like 16, 17. So I asked them if I could work in the coach check room. I did. Then after that, I worked a year later, I think, or two. A year later, I worked on the stage. I set up the stage and the sound and everything.
Ah, okay.
I learned how to do that. And back those days, besides the DJ, the most important person at a club who knew everybody and who knew everybody in the business, music business, was a doorman. So I pleaded and pleaded. I was like, when the one doorman said he was leaving on Wednesday, I pleaded with the manager, Al Murphy at the time, and asked him if I could. And he said, okay, I'll take a chance on you because you're pretty mature for your age, yada, yada, yada. But I was only 18 at the time, and you had to be 21 to get in. So I was a doorman, and I was super serious and tough because I didn't want to lose my job, and I wanted to, you know, this is my stepping stone in the industry. So long story short, it worked out because I did meet everyone from the industry. I started meeting people from the record labels and producers, et cetera, et cetera. And every morning, I should say, I left Zanzibar because we didn't leave till 10 a.m. I'd go home and DJ and practice and, you know, make sure I contacted the people I met. And you know, eventually one thing led to another. And one night Timmy was coming in when he just started working at BLS, and Tony just started working at KISS, doing the dance shows. We were doing all the Saturday night dance parties. And he's like, I'm going to London for the first time, bro. I was like, oh my goodness, in London? They know about us in London? He's like, yeah. He's like, I can't believe it. And he's like, but I got to get someone to do the show. And I said, well, I'll do it. And he's like, that's right, what the fuck? You should do this shit. Like, what are you, like, yeah, you do it. Every time I go somewhere, you got to do it. So that's when I started doing my show. And the one thing is, you know, when we all learned how to play, we all kind of looked at each other and said, okay, each one of us has to have our own style. We can't sound alike. And it's so funny, I kind of recall us going, I said, I'm going to be T. Scott, okay? And Timmy's like, I'm going to be Larry. And Tony's, I'm going to be David, you know? So that was our thing. We always, even before we got on the radio, we knew we had to have our own style, and we did. And, you know, going further, you know, Timmy and I stayed on BLS, like I said, he was on there 12 years, I think, and I was on there 10. And Tony was like 15 or more, maybe. But it was our stepping stone to the industry.
Talk to me about the importance and the significant role that radio played, and if it still plays a role today. Like, I think I moved to New York in 2004, so I'm still familiar with WBLS and KISS. However, through the years, unless you have a car, I don't think people listen to the radio as they used to. And a lot of radio stations are not around as they used to either. So, yeah, does it still have a role? I know it's different.
Well, it's just like everything else evolves. That has evolved too. Radio is not as pertinent factor in an artist's career as it once was today. And that's just like anything else, just like you're not going to go buy your latest CD today, you know? So everything evolves, everything moves with technology, et cetera, et cetera. So radio is definitely not a mainstay. Just like maybe 3 months ago, right before the holiday, right before the summer, the three majors labels, there's only three now, Universal, Sony, and Warner Brothers, they fired almost half of all their promotional staff. So radio is not as a key factor anymore. But back then, it was the internet, it was influence. We didn't even realize that we were influencers back then, because millions and millions and millions of people heard us every single day on the radio, and that's how we started traveling to Europe and Asia and all those places. We had no idea that all our tapes were going worldwide, and people were getting our information and contacting us to come play. And at first we were like, nah, this is nonsense. You know, we're from New York, we don't trust all these people. How am I gonna come to Italy and play? Like, how do you know about us in Italy? But those cassettes and those tapes and those reels and the radio, like I said, those two stations in New York were the number 1 and 2 in the country.
It's crazy.
During that time. So not just here in the States, but everything that was done on those stations really set the pace for what was happening musically in all genres, except for country music, you know, but in all genres. So, you know, we were, you know, if this was now, we'd be influencers with 10, 20 million followers, because we were back then. So that's the difference, and that all came from radio, not the internet. Whereas influencers now get it through internet and through social media. Back then, you got it through radio, because radio was number 1. And back then, the big difference was there were gatekeepers for music. All the independent labels and major labels, that's the only place that you ever heard music from. You couldn't just put music up and have it come out. You couldn't, unless you were a small independent, but I'm talking about, you know, there was a system, and the music that people heard and the chart-topping music, whether the 100 top or whatever during the time, came from us, came from these labels. And whereas today, you don't need a label to produce music and to put out music and to as far as artist development for marketing and promotion and visual and video, et cetera, you don't need a record label anymore. You can do all those things yourself, which I like. I just, you know, the gatekeeping part is the hard part, because you get so much garbage that you have to weed through now because nobody's gatekeeping.
Right.
Whereas all the music that I would hear, because being the head of A&R for all those years, I kept away all the bad music, and my counterparts and peers did the same. So, you know, like with anything, whenever you make a step forward, there's always, you know, something a step back. Nothing's perfect in this, you know, technology world, but it's just evolving. So that's where we are today.
Yeah, I think the availability of music, as you say, you were one of the people that were responsible of certain songs getting played or not. First on the radio, and then on the other side of actually signing the people to make the music that gets played on the radio. If that makes sense. what would you think now an artist, again, you said we don't need all, well, maybe we need them, but technically we can release music tomorrow on our own and put it up online and do all the things. But what would be a, yeah, I'm gonna skip my questions here.
Okay.
And go straight to your role as an A&R. There's number one, since we're here at the Ladies of Hip Hop studio right here, you just mentioned as you walked in, oh yeah, I signed Missy Elliott, I signed MC Light. I think you signed on Vogue as well.
Yes.
So many artists that I grew up with, that I was a teenager when they came out. It's like legendary. So, but before that, you was the program director, music program director at the radio.
Right.
How did that transition happen, and like what were the differences from the radio part to you signing the artists?
Well, it was once again. I went to college, and when I was in college is when I was doing the door at Zanzibar, because I went from 18. You know, I told you at 18, so I went to college, and my two loves were music and architecture and art. So I have a degree in architecture because I was in college during that time. And when I graduated from college, I was on the radio, and for like 2 years by that time, 2 or 3 years. And I was asked Timmy said, maybe we can get an internship. You can get an internship at the radio station. And I was like, great, because I either have to do my apprenticeship for architecture or I can get an internship at the radio station. And he helped me get that internship, and I never looked back. I never got my apprenticeship or my license, but I used my architecture for other businesses later. But yeah, that was it. That was the starting point. And I did everything, as an intern. I got people's food. I didn't care what I did as long as I was there and as long as I was learning. Mm-hmm. And so BLS was one of the only, if not the only major black radio station corporation. It was all black. And so it was a place where you had to really work hard, but you knew that if you did, the opportunities would come to you, and they were very supportive. And BLS and that whole organization really, I could say for both Timmy and I, really made our careers and really helped us push us forward and gave us major opportunities, because we were very young, and during the time there was Frankie Crocker, who was like this huge dynamic figure in radio and personality and entertainment, who was very much open to us being young and out partying every night and knowing what to play. And what we would ask him or tell him that we heard or we play, he would get into it and he'd play it right away. So we had a lot of support. And after a year or so, they gave us the responsibility, both Timmy and I, to be assistant music director. In other words, all the people that are coming in with records that want to get played from all the record labels, independent and major, would come to us and play them for us. So that we started to meet all the industry players, all the vice presidents of promotion, et cetera, et cetera. And they were very generous to us, needless to say, because they wanted their records played. So we made great relationships. And then Timmy left and went to Motown because we were doing so well at the station and we were picking great records for the station, and along with the program director, et cetera, and B.K. Kirkland, who was a great man. He was a program director there when I was there too. Because they had such confidence in us, the record label started saying, wait, if these guys can pick and help pick great songs for our number one station, they can do it for a label which services the world, And that's when I started getting invitations from labels to come in and for hiring for A&R. And that's when, that was my goal. And the thing is, I never thought about it. I just wanted to make these stepping stones. And I knew eventually it would happen. But it has to happen naturally in the music business, because the music business you can't go into unless the business wants you. And the only reason me, Tim, Tony were able to get in is because we build our brands before that. You have to build your brand, and the industry has to want you and say, come in. You know, I had like 3 different labels vying for me to do A&R, but I chose Atlantic Records because it was my mother's favorite artists were on Atlantic Records, you know, Donny Hathaway, et cetera.
Oh, God.
So, and Roberta Flack, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, that's how that came to fruition.
Okay. You signed, excuse me, you signed a lot of hip hop artists, but also a lot of, I guess now we would call it house music, dance music artists.
Right.
Did that happen simultaneously? Did you make a specific choice to sign these or dance music artists as well? I might be completely wrong, but I believe that there was a certain time where hip hop artists and dance music artists were kind of like respecting each other, and they were both released on major labels or the sub labels. When did you see that the dance music artists got less and less love and were able to release their music on the labels?
Yeah, when I first got there in '86 at the Atlantic, it was a mission of mine to incorporate the music that I grew up with in New York. And it was the music of a youth movement, and that's what we were. And every genre has started, modern genre of music has started from a youth movement of some sort. Even rock and roll, there was guys, they might have looked older, but they were young, you know? It was all a youth movement. So yes, and I lost my train of thought there. What were you asking me?
My question is basically, what was the point, or when was the point where you said you made it your mission to sign dance music artists? So what we now consider house music.
Yes. So when I first got to Atlantic, like I said, in '86, I was on a mission to sign the music that I knew was popular and that I loved in every club that we didn't actually. When I would go to clubs, I never really partied. I just stand there and listen and learn. Like clubs were my colleges before going to college. They were I always call Larry Levan and T. Scott my #1 professors, because they taught me everything, and never spoke to them. I mean, until I got older, and you know, I would just stand there and listen and learn. And even in the loft, I was there since I was 14, and I'd go upstairs and just sit inside the speakers and listen to David all night. And so it was really a learning process. So yeah, it took some time for me to realize that on this side of dance music for a major label, it wasn't anything that was happening at the time. There weren't any major labels doing house music when I first got there, and or hip hop really. They weren't during the early '80s when I went to Atlantic is when there was really primarily no hip hop. When I got to Atlantic, we had, oh my goodness, one rap artist, JJ Fad. I don't know if you remember JJ Fad.
No, I don't.
So I thought it was important to sign, the movements, and the movements during that time was hip hop. R&B was always special to me, so that was the #1 thing for me to start signing R&B artists. But there's 3 genres that I signed during that time, which was dance hall, because I signed the dance first. Lieutenant Stitchie was the first dance hall artist signed to a major label, and I felt it important to sign hip hop. So Audio 2 was the first rap record I signed, top billing. And then on the hip hop house side, the first artist I signed was 10 City.
Wow.
10 City, yeah. So from there, I wanted to build on each. And it was important not just to sign the artists, but I also wanted to sign the producers and give producers opportunity. That's why I did Kerry Chandler's first music, and I did Roger S.'s first music, and Tony's first music, Timmy's, I mean, everybody. I got all Louis and all the guys to mix everything for me, and David and Frankie, because I just wanted to bring the exposure to that genre of music that we created and that we pioneered. Because the major labels weren't doing it, but the smaller labels were doing it, the independent ones, but the majors weren't at that time. So that was very, very important to me. So yeah, during that time, those were the genres that, for me personally, that I wanted to sign. And I wanted to fill any holes musically that I knew were viable to the youth at that time that the label wasn't dealing with. And it worked. You know, it was very successful because, like I said, you know, I never forget when I heard, and what inspired me to do that is when I was younger and I heard Rapper's Delight on BLS when I was like 12, I was 13 or something. The first rap record ever played on radio. And I lost my mind. As my grandfather was like, "What are you doing going crazy?" I was like, "It's hip hop on radio." And he's like, "What the hell is hip hop? Like, what the heck is that?" But yeah, since that time I knew I want to make a concerted effort to get our music, you know, exposed to the masses.
I have a question in regards to, as it seemed to me, you were actively either DJing or being in the clubs and going out, and then during the day, I guess you had your A&R job or like your executive role in that sense. So you had your ears to the club or ears to the street, as one would say. Nowadays, with I guess that what's the word I'm looking for? With all these positions not necessary anymore to music being heard, the people who still do have a say in signing artists and whatever that means today, what is their ear to the street? The ear to Instagram, or how viral an artist is, or like how much quote unquote noise, or like
I make it's easy for me to do it now because I did it for 30 years or whatever. But it's easy for me to make fun of where we are today. But I respect where we are today because it's the evolution. So, but you know, as we say, there's old heads in all kind of industries, right? And I'm not going to be one of those old heads that knocks where we are today, because everyone has their opportunity to move forward in their time with their technology and everything else, just like I did in '86. I'm sure whoever was back in, you know, 76 or 66 said, you know, way these guys are doing A&R today, I don't get it, you know. But we did our thing. So I'm happy to see the young A&R community do their thing today. But I must say, it's definitely not the same. It's artists and repertoire meant and means and should mean the development of talent in various ways, artists and repertoire, A&R. Whereas today, I always say this, and everyone laughs when I say it, but today A&R means analytics and research.
Yeah, you're completely right. Yeah.
So you know, they're still A&R people. They just got different format and a different way of doing and finding talent. And you have to adjust to the technology. You have to adjust to the time. So we can't just sit back and say that they are less talented or that they are less anything, because this is just where we are. And if I was doing A&R today and just started now, I'd be doing it that way too, you know? So it's really about the end result at the end of the day. You know, if you're finding true talent, if you're finding talent that is making music, or if you're making music, or are you making a personality? So which one is it? Because a lot of times music is used today as a tool more so than a tool for artistry. You know, it's more of a tool for personal, I guess, personal fame, so to speak. Because so many artists come out and they have one hit record, and then the rest of their career is just their personality. It's never any other records that come out that are hits. It's never any other records that are memorable or albums or anything else. There's no catalog of music that's that important. But I'm talking about those artists that are like just coming out and just. But there are obviously those that are majorly established, like, you know, the Billie Eilishes and the Drakes and the Kendricks, and you know, they have great catalogs and have really concentrated on the craft of making music, and you know, didn't care as much like a Kendrick, for instance, about the personality part. Because eventually you'll make it into their world. So, you know, it's both sides now. It used to be just one side. You just made music to be a star, a musician or a performer, a singer, a star. Now you make music for that reason, but you also make it to be a personality. And because you may not have that talent, but if you can make a hit record and make your personality a star, then yeah, you might be okay, like so many artists we know.
Do you think there's even a space for artists that don't want to partake in any of this? I want to build a personality or all
there's plenty of them out there,
and just really focus on the music.
Yeah, there's plenty of them out there, and that's the part I like about it, is that they have the freedom now to express themselves, and they don't have to go with the common commercial kind of way to put yourself out there. So yeah, there definitely are a lot. You know, when you search for music now, and you hear, I still hear such amazing R&B music. I still hear a lot of amazing house music. I hear a lot of amazing hip hop. But you got to search for it, and you got to find them. And it's not always the most popular at the time, because that's sometimes these days, many of them are one-offs, and then they become personalities. And you know, and then there's those that, you know, do it and they're consistent, and they get an audience, and they have their own circle and their own fan base, and they can tour with them and do all the things that are necessary. You don't need to have a top 10, top 100 song on Billboard anymore to maintain a real career in the music business and to garnish a real fan base.
What is today, if I'm not mistaken, you're doing consulting work, or like, are you still with a particular label, or you work on your own?
No, I'm pretty much I'm pre-tired. I'm pre-tired because I'll never retire, so I'm pre-tired.
I'm always tired, but that's something else.
I'm pre-tired. I'm never going to retire, but I'm not working, you know, I'm not in the office like I once was for years. And, or, you know, I have ancillary businesses and things that are going on. But getting back to playing and everything like I did in the last year has been, you know, my go-to right now. Like that's I'm working and my hobby. That's what I'm doing. And doing it for the love of the music, and because it's the thing I enjoy doing the most is DJing. Even when I was the executive at the labels, I was the executive vice president of a major record label, and people ask me sometimes, "What do you do?" I say, "I'm a DJ," because it was always, even when I wasn't doing it for all those years, it was still like it's what I loved the most, But yeah, it's these days it's nice to do something for so long that you can, and like anyone can do anything, any job that you do and you do it well for a long period of time, you can start in some way or another find ways to consult or find ancillary ways to do business as you mature, because the business doesn't get older. The business always stays young, Yeah. But yeah, it's a lot of fun out there now.
What would a general piece of advice be that you would give people who want to start DJing now? It feels like in New York, everybody's a DJ. There's not many who want to DJ, but is there something that anybody who wants to start out or want to play music, and they look for you as being Merlin Bobb, and maybe look to you as a mentor or somebody that they look up to, is there just maybe not even a technical thing, but just something, in general, that they should always keep in the back of their mind?
Well, right now I mentor quite a few young up-and-coming DJs and producers, and even those that have been doing it for a few years that I can mentor. Like I said, I didn't come back just to have fun doing my hobby, I came back primarily to help move a movement and a genre that I helped pioneer, along with so many other, talented young men and women in New Jersey and New York and Chicago. We pioneered this, and not knowing that it was going to be #1 genre in the world, and that it was going to supply us with all these other various EDM genres and the tech genres, and all those genres came from the evolution of house music, all these subgenres, I should say, because there's no new genre of dance music. They're all subgenres, and house is a genre, but it most definitely came from R&B and disco. Was what we fused together, because as teenagers in those clubs and in all those states that I just talked about, there was a vast amount of underground clubs that played those records, R&B, dance records, and disco. So we as teenagers, back then, that's what we heard, and we loved them both. So what did we do? We fused the two together. And we made house music from it. And that's what it is. And we did it all at the same time. I mean, I was doing it with Boyd and Timmy in New York, and Tony, and Louie, and everybody else, and Vincent Herbert, and Blaze, and all these guys, and Boyd Jarvis. And meanwhile in Chicago, Marshall and Steve Hurley and all these guys. And in the early 80s, we were sending, because I was on the radio, so they were sending me their music to play, and I was sending them ours. So we were all doing the same thing at the same time. So we were all creating this genre simultaneously.
Right.
Because I have so many early tracks that I used to play, and everything they'd send me, I'd play, because, like I said, I always wanted to be different. And like Tony used to find all the imports and all the crazy imports to play back then, and I would find everything I could that was funky from Chicago. And I don't care if it sounded like, it sounded muffled, because they were all cassettes back then. Sometimes I'd play it from a cassette because it was just that funky and it was that hot of a track. But we were all doing it at the same time. And then Chicago I give them 200% credit for coming up with the brand, which is house. They branded it. I mean, to us, we didn't brand it in New York and Jersey. We just called it underground dance music, because we knew this was where it came from. That's, But Chicago definitely branded it. And the godfather of house music, Frankie, came from New York.
From New York, yeah.
And he brought all those things that we were listening to in the garage and the loft to Chicago. And it's wonderful. Listen, I don't get into the back and forth who's first. There is no first. It's like asking who, Chucky Checker or Fats Domino or Little Richard, who did rock and roll first? Like, no, it was all at the same time. They created that genre in different states, just like we did in different states, So, and I give Chicago 200% because they had the first big hits of house music, and that's why we went along with that brand. I was like, okay, we'll get under that umbrella too. We'll call it house, no problem, But yeah, it's. I just want the history of it to be known. I want to continue. I want to move it forward. So many people think house came from Europe. It's funny.
Yeah.
But it's understandable because hip-hop just overshadowed it in a matter of a year or two. Like, the message came out in hip-hop, that message, DJ Flash and the Furious Five, and that changed everything in New York in a lot of areas. That just like, when that record came out, it was just like the whole, because every kid in my school, high school, everyone I knew from New York to Chicago, they were into both hip hop and because it was our music from the youth.
Mm-hmm.
But as soon as that message came out, it just seems like it just totally overshadowed the house community. And then house went to Europe for the next 2 decades, and they created all the other genres and brands, which was great. And now it's come full circle again, you know?
Right.
Which music does, because there hasn't been a new genre of music created in over 40 years. There's plenty of subgenres.
Plenty of them, correct.
But not a new genre. Hip hop and house were probably the last two quote unquote genres that were created.
Yeah. I want to talk about Shelter briefly, the club Shelter, but also use it as an example. I've heard you say in a previous interview that you guys opened Shelter because the garage closed and you wanted or needed, or both, a space for you and your community, your people. And also you've mentioned, and you said actually previously before, that Shelter was run by Black people, and it's still like after 33 years. How many years? How old is Shelter? 30 plus years. There's so many, I call it venues in New York, but I can't think of the top of my head any Black person who runs or owns, I should say own, a venue or a club. And I wonder how that makes you feel, and how the city, as you said, the city is great, but nightlife is nightlife. And I think it's, to my experience, very segregated right now.
Yeah, but it's segregated now, but it was even more so then, of course.
Okay.
So, Timmy and I, we wanted to open a club because that was our dream, because we grew up in clubs. Like I said, that's like, you're a great student and you love school, and then you want to open up a school for kids one day, So we wanted to open up a club because we loved the community. And the community put us on the map, and we wouldn't be where we are without the community and the support of the people who consume the music, the dancers, people who work at these places, who get, and the creative community that's in there also. So when the garage closed, that was a big loss for us. In that community, because it was at its peak. Like, the garage didn't close when it was one of those clubs that, started having hip hop parties and then it closed down. No, the garage was at its peak. It was like you'd go in on a Friday, especially Friday nights were crazy. But Friday or Saturday night, there had to be 200 people outside. More, 500 people outside, just trying to get in, and another 1,000 or more inside, So it closed at its peak, and they left a big, wide open gap. And that's one of the reasons for 3 years it was closed before we opened Shelter. And during that time, like I said, hip hop just dominated. It just took over. Because somebody just asked me this, Mark Francis asked me the other day about the garage and whether or not there were people like today, a lot of the parties, especially the soulful or more soulful house parties in New York, New Jersey, et cetera, Baltimore, most of the people there are like from their 40s up, So he was asking me, if the garage or the clubs back then, I was like, no, all of us in there were teenagers in our early 20s. There was nobody in there over 30 probably. Very few, very, very few. Like it was the next generation's thing. It was our thing. This music and everything, it was our thing. So yeah, that part, it's very disappointing to me to know that Timmy and I were probably two of the only still nightclub owners and brand owners, not just of Shelter, but of, you know, the other clubs we own, Greenhouse, the bottle service clubs, as they call them, because we saw what the business was going. So we're businessmen. We had to, you know, make moves. And we hooked up with John B. and you know, made one of the most successful nightclubs in the country with Greenhouse. It was the most popular club in the country.
Was that on
Barrack Street?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I think I've been there before.
And we opened up like 4 or 5 other ones, and we had them all going during that time. But you know, for me to come back and not to go to Bushwick and go to all these places and see that, you know, very few, except for there's Now and Then, because we talked to them and we're going to do some work with them. Actually, one of the owners of Now and Then worked with me at Atlantic Records. So, but as far as I know, that's the only minority-owned club in New York or Bushwick. If there are others, please let us know so we could be supportive. But you know, it's hard for me because that we kind of felt like we were going to be the pioneers of that too, and that others would follow. You know, because you have to. What other way can you continue to support the community of a genre of music and keep it relevant than to be a part of it in a business? But you know, there's still time. There's still hope for us to do more in that area because I'd love to see it. And Jersey, I would say, is more proactive with it. You know, what I see, I'm talking about what I see now in Jersey. They're doing amazing things with the genre and the culture, and doing these major events during the summer in every town. You know, they went from 400 people to like, some of them have 5,000, 6,000 people showing up now at a lot of these house music events. So, you know, New York will come around. It's not as easy to get, you know, licenses and so on in New York. It's not easy, believe me. They didn't make it easy on us, you know, and we got, I'll never forget, we got sued at Greenhouse for $1 billion. $1
billion?
Yeah. By someone who said, I don't even want to mention the person's name because I'm not going to give him that, but they were tying it to something, a book that they were putting out, and so they wanted to make some news, and they said that our club was racist and Greenhouse was racist, but they didn't know 2 of the owners were black, me and Timmy. So they had CNN outside, and they were doing this press conference, and me and Tim showed up. And they were like, wait a minute, you guys are the owners of this place? Like, yep. And that was it. It all shut down. So, you know, that was disappointing. But yeah, I wish there were more minorities that owned the business of the culture that they're bringing into their business.
Right.
But, you know, it'll get there. And like I said, I'm here to help in whatever way move forward because we've been there and done that for many, many, many years.
Right. So what are some of the projects coming up for you in the future besides, DJing, you following DJing? Okay, so I've watched an interview, one of the interviews that I saw, and in that one, I think you talk about producing and then you say you quote unquote know your limits and you've never produced anything. And then just yesterday, I saw that there's a track coming out by Mark Francis and yourself. What has changed? Talk to me about.
Well, like I said, I want to move the culture forward. You know, whatever I can do to help. One of the things when I started going through music to hear what I could play these days, it was just amazing to me. Like some of the songs are not great songs that I would like to hear, and. So I said, well, you know, I know all these guys who have been doing it. Let me just give them some ideas and find some, you know, great songs and do some things together. But I'm definitely not producing it by myself, that's for sure, because I'm not necessarily a producer. Like I said, many years ago, when I was in my 20s, I tried to produce. I can engineer because I know how to engineer. I used to mix all the albums for Atlantic and all the records albums we put out.
Okay.
That I know how to do very well, but producing, I try it, and I tried it, and I'm like, this shit is whack. I'm not
Sound
putting
like me.
I'm not putting out anything whack. And you got to know your limits. Just like any business, especially in the music business, if your shit is whack, you got to say to yourself, this is not my strength, and I got to do what my strength is and pay attention to that. And if somebody tells you that's close to you, your shit is whack, you should listen to them, you know? So, but now and that's when I was doing it by myself. But now I'm co-producing things.
Okay.
And that is easy for me because that's all I've ever done was go in the studio. Like, it's almost like I say to people sometimes, it's like, wait a minute, you don't sing and you don't play instruments, but you have sold 180 million albums from different artists. And now I think it's 100, I don't know, my daughter keeps up with this, she tells me, but 100 billion streams from my artists that I've signed.
Oh, wow.
And you don't play an instrument, you don't do anything. It's like, no, it's like a sixth sense that you have.
Your ear.
That you have to use. We all have a gift, we all have a talent. And I'm fortunate and blessed that I found what mine was. But no, it's that's, you know.
So this one is the first of many to come. Can I say that, or
yeah, we have about between now and the end of the year, probably about 5 releases.
Oh wow, okay.
Yeah.
And the year is August, September, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, congratulations. I'm looking forward to that. And is there anything else, before I ask my last question, that you would like to share that I haven't touched on? First of all, I do want to say to the listeners that I didn't even scratch the surface with all the accomplishments that you have. So I would recommend for everybody to go on a deep dive into Merlin Bobb and his history and all the artists that you've signed, because, yeah, it's all your favorites. But other than that, I know I can talk a lot, and I just want you to have a chance to get everything off your chest that you maybe have not said before.
Well, I can't emphasize any more or less what it means to keep moving the culture forward. Because I said, as we do that, and if I could be a part of that and help do that in areas where I have expertise, then I'm open to it. It's and not just me. It's not just me by myself. Like I know plenty of people who will say yes to things. I know plenty of people that'll be like, get out of my face about that. I don't want to be bothered with that anymore. You know, but I also know folks that, you know, besides myself, that are willing to mentor and help and move this culture forward and help with opportunities. It's just that we have to, I wouldn't be sitting here if it wasn't for those that helped me in that area. And because what do we know about owning businesses, and what do we know about, we come from generations of no lineage of business owners and et cetera, in our black communities. You know, everybody just worked. And, you know, so we are the first generation, and I'm the first generation to have these opportunities, to experience all these opportunities, to do these things. And when you're with the first, you take all that knowledge, because you're going to have those hills and valleys, but you take all that knowledge and you have to move it to the next. And they should build on top of that to the next level. And that's how you build generational wealth and generational knowledge. And so I just want to be a part of that and moving that forward. So,
what is the best way for people to reach out to you? You seem, and just based on my experience, you're very accessible. I know, but you seem like a very accessible person.
I'm just kidding.
Is there a preferred way? I know you have an Instagram.
Yeah,
or
it's on my IG. It's
okay.
on IG. It's all good.
DJ
I've only had
Bobb.
IG for like maybe not even a year now.
Do you like it?
Yeah, it's cool.
You know? Okay.
It's cool. It's cool.
Love and hate relationship that I have with this thing.
It's cool. I have 2 of them. I have one for my family, which is only like 90 people on it, which is perfect.
We don't hit him up there.
Yeah. And then the other one is for, DJ stuff and
Okay.
music stuff and industry stuff.
All right.
So
So the last question is a very seemingly generic question, but I ask this question every guest. Could you name me 3 tracks that you personally associate with dance in whatever type of fashion, in any type of genre?
with dance?
Yes, the first things that pop into your head. I know because there's millions.
Optimistic by Souls of Blackness. Love is the Message by MFSB. And 3 you said?
If you
That
want
pop
to,
into my head. What's popping in my head right now?
can name me more if you would like.
The Music's Got Me, which was the first New York house record to be pressed and released
Okay.
in 1983.
Oh my God.
Yeah, those 3. Wow, I got all kind of things running through my head now. Yeah, it's hard to ask a music person.
Exactly.
Because I really don't have a favorite artist. I have artists I love, like Chaka Khan or Sade or, Stevie, etc. But it's hard because I love them all, because each one of them has their own identity that I can identify
Absolutely.
with and reflect on. And that's my music encyclopedia and history of what I grew up with. My mother playing, Marvin Gaye every morning. Like, it's what we grew up hearing every Saturday morning when your mother's cleaning the house, is what we grew up to. Your aunt's parties, that me and Tony used to DJ at our aunt's parties with 45s, when we were kids. So it's so much. And, even the songs that my 16-year-old daughter plays for me now, from some of the R&B artists that are young that she finds, are just amazing to me. And those are some of the songs I'm remixing and doing, because to me it's about taking those songs that they're familiar with and making them into, in some way or another, house classics or house songs too, because they're wide open to all genres of music. Mm-hmm. That's the exciting part, and that's why I say it's come full circle, because the youth have had 40 years of hip-hop here in the States, and now they're totally open to this. Gen Zs, et cetera, are totally open to all the genres. Like, I think, what is the percentage? Like 75% of ages of 12 to 25. I know I'm just, paraphrasing here in whatever way, but they listen to catalog music more than 75% of music they listen to is catalog music.
Really?
More so than new music. So
That is
the
interesting.
youth is so in tune musically now than ever. Like we heard it at our mothers and grandparents while they were cleaning. We heard all the hot music, right?
Right.
But now they hear it every single day whenever they want. It's open to them, and they gravitate towards great songs and hearing great music from artists from the past. So that's why at least 70-something% of that demographic's music they listen to is catalog music.
I did not know that, and I'm really surprised.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I have to give them more props. the younger generation.
It's just that it's so widespread, and there's such a diversity of genres and subgenres and everything that for them to get to. But yeah, they're very musically intelligent and understand good music, believe it or not. And just because they're creating what they want to hear right now, and some of us may think it's not up to par with what we may have liked, doesn't mean that they're not musically knowledgeable. They are. These Gen Zs and these kids that are coming up are very knowledgeable. The ones that are serious about music, I'm talking about, not the ones that are trying to have personalities from music, like we talked about earlier.
Okay, I understand. Yeah. Merlin Bobb, thank you so much. This was an honor. Thank you for taking the time and tracking out here.
And thank you for doing this, because like I said, this is part of why I want to do this is
Thank you.
because of what you're doing and educating people and giving them, the other side of the story. So that's important. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. To all the listeners, thank you for listening. I know there's like buttons, comment buttons, subscribe buttons. Hit them all and tune into all the episodes. Thank you.